Hello everyone. Because Book 1 has wrapped up and we've already started talking about individuals giving things up, such as yielding to arbitration, it seemed like a good time to pause and talk about some potentially relevant theories. I would like to start out by talking about loss aversion theory, because I think it is an important one to bear in mind as we begin to explore how to transfer from the state of nature into the state of having a commonwealth, because people will have to give things up in this process. So, what is loss aversion theory? It's something that was brought up by Daniel Kahneman and Richard Thaler back in 1979, and whose principles were reconfirmed by Ruggeri et al. In 2020. It is associated with the status quo bias discussed by Samuelson and Zeckhauser, where people tend to prefer the way things are to hypothetical futures. In Samuelson and Zeckhauser's example, they talk about how someone is being biased against both buying and selling. But we could theoretically extend that to other arenas outside of economics. Even if a situation is bad, there can be comfort in that consistency. Yeah, it's bad, but at least you know it's bad, and you can plan for those bad things. You can try to avoid them, mitigate them, etc. Changing the situation could mean facing new problems that you aren't used to dealing with. And obviously, on the flip side, someone who is already in a good position will be worried about losing that good thing. Their whole life may be good, or we may only be talking about a small part of their life. But the thing is, nobody wants to compromise what good things they have going for them. And this is where loss aversion comes into play. There are two things Kahneman and Thaler noticed. The first is that when you're looking at people making risky choices, balancing risks and whatnot, it is not a status of wealth or welfare that explains the utility of their decision. Instead, it is the changes relative to a neutral reference point that explain the choices they make. Wherever someone currently is on the spectrum of haves and have-nots, and wherever they might end up on that spectrum, is not as important in their decision-making process compared to the shift from their current status quo. Someone who is already poor doesn't want to become more poor any more than someone who's wealthy would want to become more poor and have only, let's say, average wealth. The second thing they noticed was that people preferred the status quo because the disadvantages of leaving it loom larger than advantages. So, whatever possibilities they were looking at, the disadvantages, the things that they would lose, were just so much bigger than the things they could gain. And we could say that this is just a natural survival mechanism. It fits with what Hobbes talks about regarding the laws of nature about not doing something that would harm ourselves. Whether we are in a good position or a bad position, it is against nature for us to do things that cause us some form of harm. So situations where we stand to lose something, where we risk being injured in some way, are going to be setting off a lot of alarm bells in our minds. Almost any change, when you think about it enough, will have a cost associated, and we are hardwired to avoid those. Sometimes we can see this in the people around us. For example, an individual who decides not to take a promotion and an opportunity at a better paying job because the cost associated with it is having to move to a new city, state, or country. Even if on the wealth scale they could have the same quality of life or a better one, that cost, that loss of leaving the familiar environment, deters them. A third thing they noticed is probably the most significant. They found that people weren't simply put off because of a potential loss. It wasn't equal compared to what they might feel when they stood to gain something. Instead, a slight increase in loss left them more deterred than a similar-sized gain would encourage them. This is a chart that they used. In the center is the status quo, the current situation from which the individual is considering moving in terms of gains or losses. As you can see, the magnitude or value of the loss goes up faster as you move away from the center when compared to the value of a gain. A loss of 5, let's just say units, has a much greater intensity than the perceived gain of 5 units does. Losing a little bit seems like a bigger deal than gaining the same amount. So, how do you think this might come into play as people move from this state of nature, which, while it involves constant war, also involves complete freedom, and seek to build a commonwealth which promises to bring them peace and a safer, longer life, but requires them to lose some of the freedoms they have in nature? Have you seen loss aversion in your life? Have you maybe felt it in yourself? Post below in the comments. And while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe to support the channel.